Chapter 842. Looking at the handful of fine sand in his hand, the immortal King Xiaoyu suddenly felt a bit melancholy. Another talented young man had died. Once upon a time, such two young men lost their lives in his hands and turned into gray fine sand. Those two young people, like Wang Lu, had a promising future. They were brimming with talent, and their domineering, imposing manner was even stronger than Wang Lu's. They were rare geniuses in the myriad worlds. Unfortunately, compared with their amazing talent, Xiaoyu needed the vitality in their bodies more. Before the two of them ascended, they were the overlords of 9 regions. One was named Shi Huang, and the other was called De Sheng. To this day, Xiaoyu could no longer remember the faces of the two of them. Only their names remained in his memory. Since when did I stop admiring these geniuses of the new generation? At this time, although Xiaoyu had a head full of silver hair, there was still a bit of youthful vigor in his eyes. Therefore, there was a bit of emotion in his heart that was impossible to have when he was old. He still remembered that a long, long time ago, he was able to praise the new generation of geniuses. At that time, there were 2 rare geniuses in the immortal world. Xiaoyu had high hopes for them. He even agreed with them that after his fall, the throne of the immortal king would be inherited by the 2 of them. Of course, there was only one throne. Therefore, the 2 also agreed that when Xiaoyu fell, one of them would be the king, and the other would enter the Wall of Worlds and become the pioneer of the immortal world. Unfortunately, these 2 young men did not wait for Xiaoyu's fall. Because compared to inheritance, Xiaoyu finally chose immortality. That was probably in the first full-scale war between the immortal world and the pantheon of the Western continent. In the fierce battle between the pantheon of gods, the 2 of them got a little bit of each other's memory, and then that memory changed their temperament at the same time. Xiaoyu, who once looked down on life and death, finally began to pursue immortality. For the sake of immortality, Xiaoyu was unscrupulous. Even though the side effects of immortality were becoming more and more obvious, causing the wise and brilliant immortal king to become slow and numb, Xiaoyu's obsession with immortality only grew with each passing day. He had never regretted anything he had done. Even if he had personally devoured his beloved wife of many years, even if he had killed his children one by one in front of their terrified gazes, even if he had turned his most beloved daughter, Xiaoyuha, into a quasi-puppet that he could pluck at any time. For the sake of longevity, Xiaoyu could give up everything. Until today, when he regained his youth in an instant, he suddenly examined his past from a different perspective. Xiaoyu, when did you become like this? If you saw this from your younger self, I'm afraid you would have immediately killed him. Xiaoyu was silent for a moment. More marks of vicissitudes gradually appeared on his face, and the melancholy in his heart also gradually faded away. No, what I'm doing now is correct. Only immortality is the true path to liberation. Even if it's not for myself or for the sake of the vast 1,000 domains, I have to live on as long as possible. Because only I can break through the wall of realms and find a glimmer of hope for this declining world. The vast 1,000 domains has declined. Whether it is the place under the jurisdiction of the immortal world or the territory of the Western continent gods, they are all rapidly declining. This is the supreme law of the vast 1,000 domains. Even the immortal king and god king cannot disobey it. Therefore, since the primitive age, so many people have chosen to go deep into the wall of realms. However, the predecessors have gone, and the future generations have been unable to continue. In a declining world, it is easier said than done to reach the height of the predecessors. Even if it is me, wanting to be comparable to the sages of the primitive age in my lifetime is also a pipe dream. Therefore, only immortality, with a longer lifespan than the sages to accumulate cultivation, can it be possible to open the wall of realms and bring vitality to this vast 1,000 domains. Therefore, I have not done anything wrong. Even if it leads to the destruction of the myriad worlds, I am the lord of this myriad worlds, the owner and heir of this vast 1,000 domains. As long as I am still alive, this world will never die. As long as I can live forever, in Xiaoyu's heart, these soliloquies constantly emerged. His body also became older, and his eyes became cloudy. However, the will of the immortal king became more firm. Letting go of the fine sand in his hand, Xia Yu turned his eyes downward. After experiencing the full power of the non-phase celestial cannon just now, the raging 9 regions finally began to converge. Although there were still some residual flames, they were not worth mentioning. After the death of Wang Lu, the 9 regions burning blood great array naturally collapsed and no longer posed a threat. As for the spirit sword mountain in the core of the great array, with just one palm, it could be crushed to pieces. This time, even if the 3,000 king pill came, it would be of no use. The overall situation was settled. The immortal world finally won. At this time, there was a roar beside Xia Yu. Your Majesty is indeed invincible. Congratulations on your victory, Your Majesty. The immortal king is invincible in all realms, and the lower realms' lowly bastards are annihilated. Xia Yu could not help but turn his eyes and saw that Feng Yun, Qing Lu, Lai Feng, and even the other senior immortals who guarded the southern heaven region had gathered together. Several of them were shouting loudly. Their voices were fanatical, but there was some fear in their eyes. No wonder they were terrified. The one who should have guarded the southern heaven region appeared here. According to the rules of the immortal world, it was a felony to leave one's post without permission. It must be because the power of the non-phase celestial cannon just now was so strong that these immortals could not help but worry. After all, once the immortal king died, the consequences would be unimaginable. It was just that this kind of worry was undoubtedly a distrust of the immortal king. The old Xia Yu no longer understood and tolerated. These newly arrived immortals waved the flag and shouted for Xia Yu in fear and trepidation, but they were just struggling to protect themselves. Xia Yu, look around you. What kind of people are surrounding you? Are you happy to be surrounded by these jumping clowns? Senior immortal Xiao Yao sneered and interrupted the praise and cheers of the rest of the people. He said to Xia Yu with a decisive attitude, you should not have forgotten what the immortal world was like, right? The immortal world has declined all the way to its current state. Do you still want to continue to lead us to fall? Xia Yu's cloudy eyes turned to Xiao Yao. That is to say, you still made a stupid choice after all. Xiao Yao sneered and said, I have no choice, Xia Yu. Do you really think that I can believe your filial piety? Huh, what you said is really nice. Like Xia Xiaohe, she's just an idiot who used the name of the immortal king's daughter to act unscrupulously. She deserves to die. But I clearly remember that you once said to Xia Xiaohe, like Xiao Yao, she's just an ornament pushed to the front of the stage to attract people's attention. My real successor is only you. However, that real successor died in your hands. What nonsense are you talking about? Xiao Yao, what the hell do you want to do? Ignoring the doubts and curses around him, senior immortal Xiao Yao continued to point at Xia Yu and scolded, Xia Yu, you can deceive others, but don't think you can deceive me with this nonsense. The fact that I betrayed you has become a fact, and you will eventually absorb me as a sacrifice. In that case, why should I be like those incompetent rats who are obedient to you? You old bastard who has lived for 100,000 years. You will definitely devour yourself to death in the endless void. A complicated look flashed across Xia Yu's face. How did you know about my conversation with Xiao He? You shouldn't know about the things in the Palace of Three Purities. There was a bit of sarcasm in senior immortal Xiao Yao's smile. Yes, you have arranged the Palace of Three Purities as an impregnable fortress, and even your most trusted subordinates can't spy on its secrets. When you killed immortal Qin and great ancestor Desheng, it was also in the Palace of Three Purities, and your conversation with Xia Xiaohe was in a private place. So you don't understand why I know what you said at the beginning? Of course, it was Xiao He who told me. Xia Yu sighed. As expected, the two of you, yes, so, can you understand why I betrayed you? Whether it's for the great cause of the immortal world or for my own selfishness, I can no longer worship you as king. Xia Yu, you are invincible. Even Wang Lu can't do anything to you when he uses the power of 9 regions. Naturally, I, a junior, am not your opponent. However, even if I die, I will not yield to you. With that, senior immortal Xiao Yao ignited the immortal fire all over his body, wanting to perish together with Xiaoyu. However, the next moment, an invisible hand covered his head. Xiaoyao felt that his body was empty, and the burning immortal spirit disappeared in an instant. Stupid. Xiaoyu said coldly, I actually placed high hopes on an idiot like you. I've really misjudged you. Senior Immortal Xiaoyao smiled wryly. He was indeed an idiot. Xiaoyu had placed high hopes on him, so how could there be no mechanism left in his body? Xia Xiaohe was so smart and thought that she was special. She didn't notice the seed in her body at all. How could he be an exception? Self-destruct in front of Xiaoyu? He was indeed too naive. But, apart from that, what else could he do? His only hope had now been shattered. Wang Lu's decisive blow was actually dodged by Xiaoyu. It could only be said that before this, everyone had underestimated the power of the immortal king. With the sacrifice of destroying 10,000 worlds, this 100,000 years old bastard was really powerful to an incredible extent. Xiaoyao, although you are stupid, I will still give you a chance. I will let you witness with your own eyes how I break through the wall of 10,000 worlds and bring a new future for this world. A new future, ha 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 ha. A greedy old bastard like you, no matter where you go, will only bring disaster and destruction. So what if you break through the 10,000 worlds? Do you want to go to a new world to suck blood and prolong your life? Do you want to destroy all the worlds before you give up? Xiaoyu, you. The next moment, Xiaoyu pressed his hand on Xiaoyao's head and blocked his mouth. In just a moment, this senior immortal, who was once the leader of the immortal world, would turn into a handful of fine sand, just like me? A voice that should have disappeared long ago sounded in the ears of the immortal king again. Chapter 843. You're actually still alive? Xiaoyu hid his shock in the light of the immortal king, but his voice was almost uncontrollable. Why is he still not dead? Xiaoyu almost couldn't count how many times he had killed Wang Lu, but every time, he could come back to life. Even when Xiaoyu opened his immortal eyes and searched all over the 9 regions, he was still alive. Even in the battle of the 10,000 realms, Xiaoyu rarely saw such a bizarre situation. Those who claimed to be immortal would always have some weakness. As long as the weakness was targeted, there was no enemy that could not be killed. But now, Wang Lu can't figure it out. It's just a small trick, there's no need to make such a fuss. While speaking, the astral wind in the 9th sky suddenly rolled together, and the twisted air vaguely formed a human-shaped outline. The next moment, Xiaoyu took a deep breath, and his mouth seemed to be connected to the endless void, producing a terrifying sharpness. In an instant, it formed a strong hurricane, which sucked all the air around him into his chest, and even the astral wind in the 9th sky could not escape. And the human figure formed by the strong wind naturally disappeared without a trace. However, the voice of Wang Lu still lingered in Xiaoyu's ears. PFFF, ha 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 ha, taking a deep breath? What kind of dirty trick is this? Is it fun to deceive yourself? Xiaoyu turned his fierce eyes to the ground and saw that on the land of 9 regions, a towering mountain rose from the ground, which vaguely showed a human figure. Its head was composed of countless huge stones that were hundreds of meters square. Its mouth opened and closed, making a dull and mocking laugh. Humph. Xiaoyu stretched out his hand and pointed, and there was an invisible giant palm that fell from the sky and slapped the whole mountain into powder. However, when the mountain fell, the ground at the foot of the mountain cracked open again, from which the sound of the crypt wind came out. TSK TSK, look at you, what's the difference between you and a child who fell and hit the ground? You're a dignified immortal king, why don't you go to hell? The next moment, Xiaoyu directly ignited the core of the earth with his magical ability. Immediately, lava gushed out from the crack in the earth, and then a cold current fell from the sky to condense the lava. The crack in the earth was also filled, and the sound of the crypt wind could no longer be heard. You people in the immortal world really know how to play. However, without the reverse G-Saurus pillar, how long are you going to fight like this? This time, it was another transparent human figure that was distorted by the air. Just when Xiaoyu smashed the mountain, the endless astral wind in the sky filled the air again. Even if you are old and dizzy, you can't see what state I'm in. Of course, Xia Yu could see it. However, this was truly unimaginable. Even Xiao Yao was in disbelief. Wang Lu, have you fused with 9 regions? The surrounding astral wind brought Wang Lu's laughter. That's right. With the help of the burning blood formation of the 9 states, I will sacrifice my blood to the 9 states. From now on, I will be the protector of the 9 states. Xia Yu sneered, from a living person to an undead, what is there to be proud of? Undead? Ha 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 ha, my mind is clear now, and I own an entire continent. No matter how you look at it, I'm more like a living person than a trash like you who has been struggling at death's door for 100,000 years. It's fine if it's other people, but what face do you have to mock me? I don't need to teach you the difference between humans and spirits. Transform into the spirit of 9 regions, and you will die along with this land. The birth and decay of all living things is the law of the world. You've been struggling at death's door for 100,000 years, but you still look so weak. Moreover, you're talking so much. Are you feeling guilty? Xia Yu simply shut his mouth and stopped talking. Even if he was tens of thousands of years younger, he still wouldn't be a match for Wang Lu in a battle of tongues. Now that Wang Lu had integrated himself into the 9 regions, it was indeed a wonderful move. Although it could be said that he had sacrificed his own life, he could use amazing power in a short period of time. The most important thing was that he could not be killed at all. He was integrated with the 9 regions. As long as the 9 regions were not destroyed, he would not die. However, the reverse Gisaurus pillar, which could destroy the 9 regions, was destroyed by the previous bombardment of the non-phase celestial cannon. With Xia Yu's power, it was not impossible for him to destroy the world single-handedly, but the price was so tragic that the loss outweighed the gain. Things had indeed become a bit tricky. Wang Lu chose to sacrifice himself to become the spirit of 9 regions, which was tantamount to creating a singularity for the world out of thin air. Before the Great Purge, the immortal world repeatedly probed and delayed the arrival of its main force, for fear that a singularity would suddenly appear in 9 regions one day. The so-called singularity was first used to call the starting point of the creation of all things. In the primordial age, at the beginning of the primal chaos, it was rumored that countless worlds began from a singularity. Later, the singularity was referred to as the starting point of the world's activation, the boundless world. There were always some worlds that tended to be active, and the whole world would gradually acquire the characteristics of life in its operation, and eventually have the will of the world. As the leading ancient world among the worlds, the 9 regions had long had all the conditions to produce the will of the world. However, after millions of years, it was still the rigid laws of heaven and earth that maintained the operation of the 9 regions. Many people in the immortal world suspected that the 9 regions did have its own will a long time ago, probably in the primordial age. At that time, the 9 regions was terrifyingly tyrannical. There were countless powerful people who were favored by the 9 regions, and any one of those sages had the strength beyond the immortal king. However, all things had their ups and downs. The will of the 9 regions gradually declined over time. Until today, the continent had long been a corpse, nothing to be afraid of. When the immortals first came to 9 regions, they were surprised to find that they could control many of the laws of 9 regions freely. Even the providence of the earth was under their control. This was simply incredible. Any world with a little self-respect would not allow outsiders to dictate its own providence, unless the place had completely lost its self-awareness and was at the mercy of others. Since the 9 regions was dead, they only needed to be wary of it not producing a singularity and coming back from the dead. For this reason, the immortal world had been cautious enough, but unexpectedly, at the last moment, someone actually integrated himself into the 9 regions and became this deadly singularity. However, fortunately, Wang Lu's awakening was too late. If he had incarnated into the spirit of 9 regions 20 years ago, the arrival of the immortal world would simply be a fantasy. They could not even penetrate the crystal wall of space. But now, the 9 regions was riddled with holes. The southern heaven region was completely destroyed by the reverse Gisaurus pillar, and the shadow of destruction spread all over the place along the feng shui line. Moreover, the 9 regions burning blood and non-phase celestial cannon just now were even more damaged. Wang Lu was completely in control of the endgame and was powerless to make a comeback. In the silence, Senior Immortal Xiaoyao suddenly asked, Wang Lu, why you? If the 9 regions only needs a guardian, it can be anyone, but why you? Wang Lu said with a smile, why not me? Or rather, who else could it be but me? In the name of the Lord of Holy Light, I have sacrificed hundreds of millions of creatures, but in the end, do I have to be alone? When sacrifice is needed, the leader can take the lead, which is the way to win. Like a certain old bastard who hid in the palace of 3 purities and shivered in fear during the fierce battle and only came out to pick the peach when the overall situation was settled. Upon hearing this, Senior Immortal Xiaoyao was stunned for a long time, and then a smile gradually appeared on his face. Although the 9 regions was still at a disadvantage, with such a guardian, what reason did the 9 regions have to lose? The face of the immortal King Xia Yu was gloomy as never before. Chapter 844. Xia Yu, I'll ask you one last time. How about we stop here and return to the immortal world and mind our own business? It was the same question that was previously raised by Wang Lu as a joke. But at this time, this question from the spirit of 9 regions gave people a heavy pressure. Many of the immortals around Xia Yu felt a strong sense of disharmony. The immortal spirit around them seemed to have encountered obstacles and their operation frequently became sluggish. Although the degree was very slight, it was difficult to ignore. Your Majesty, I feel that the surrounding laws of heaven and earth have begun to fight against us. In the astral wind, Wang Lu's laughter was full of mockery. You're starting to feel uncomfortable? In the past, when you came to 9 regions, you were like the proud sons of heaven, and all kinds of laws were open to you. But now, the person who manages the laws is me. Do you think I will give you the convenience in the past? And if you insist on fighting to the death with 9 regions, I can guarantee that the pressure of the laws is not even an appetizer. At most, it's the fragrance of the food from the kitchen, which is very tempting, right? I don't know if you have enough courage to swallow my meal. Wang Lu's voice began to become colder than the cold wind of the 9th sky, and his words were full of naked threats. And this time, it seemed that he really had the capital to threaten the immortals. Even the immortals found it difficult to face an awakened world. Otherwise, when the immortal world came, they would not have to worry about it and make sure that there was no singularity in 9 regions. Now that the situation of strength and weakness had reversed, perhaps it was really time to withdraw to the immortal world and find another way out. For example, before the pantheon of gods, gather the remaining forces to attack the western continent? A few immortals who were quick-witted even considered whether they could use the power of Wang Lu. There were no eternal enemies in the world, only eternal interests. And swallowing the western continent was undoubtedly in line with the interests of 9 regions and the immortal world. At that time, 9 regions could absorb the nutrients of the western continent to restore the damage caused by the reverse Gisaurus pillar and the burning blood of 9 regions. The immortal world could also find enough nourishment from the corpses of the gods of the western continent. However, after thousands of years of planning, would the purge plan come to an abrupt end? After so many sacrifices, did they have to declare failure when they were about to succeed? Wang Lu, don't act smart. If you really had the ability to serve a proper meal, you wouldn't be here talking nonsense. The immortals were at a loss. Xia Yu's words stabilized their morale. Well, this is a bit interesting. Unfortunately, you still lack strength. Xia Yu, you've been a tortoise for so many years, but you've really become a waste. You're just wasting your breath. Xia Yu said and then sneered, if you're really as skilled as you said, why can't you even fight back? I'm accumulating strength. My big move is coming soon. If you have the ability, just float in the same place and don't move. As long as I do it once, I'll kill your whole family. What a joke. Xia Yu glared at him. Then, from the endless void, the wind of primordial chaos descended. This was the spoils of war obtained by the immortal king during his campaign in the myriad world. It was the product of a highly developed civilization that was highly condensed from the endless void. Its destructive power was almost comparable to that of the reversed Gisaurus pillar. It was one of Xia Yu's trump cards. This trump card was used by him on Spirit Sword Mountain. The wind of primordial chaos swayed in the air, took away a large part of the sky, and then turned straight down to Spirit Sword Mountain. Although Wang Lu had transformed into the spirit of 9 regions and could be said to be everywhere, people with discerning eyes could see that the core of 9 regions at this time was Spirit Sword Mountain. All of Wang Lu's relatives and friends, as well as the essence of the immortal cultivation world of 9 regions, were on Spirit Sword Mountain. If this mountain was destroyed, Wang Lu would be alone. From his standpoint, he could tolerate the falling fire from the sky and the thousands of miles of strong earthquake, but he could never tolerate the disappearance of Spirit Sword Mountain. Therefore, aiming at Spirit Sword Mountain, he could force out Wang Lu's trump card. However, unexpectedly, until the wind of primordial chaos blew through the earth and turned Spirit Sword Mountain into nothingness in an instant, Wang Lu did not give any response. After this guy became the spirit of the land, did he even lose his human feelings? No. What was blown away by the wind of primordial chaos was just an illusion, a mountain that was exactly the same but empty. There was no bloody smell in the wind of primordial chaos. When he detonated the astral wind bomb just now, he unknowingly replaced Spirit Sword Mountain with the magical power of the land spirit. In an instant, Xia Yu judged the truth based on his battle instinct, and the next moment, he began to search for the real location of Spirit Sword Mountain with the magical power of the immortal king. Although this continent was under the control of Wang Lu, obstructing him everywhere, and every law was blocking the intention of the immortal king, making it difficult for his perception to reach every corner of 9 regions, Xia Yu still withstood the pressure of 9 regions with his absolute strength and found the real location of Spirit Sword Mountain. That answer really surprised him. How dare they move the Spirit Sword Mountain to the Southern Heaven region? At this time, the Southern Heaven region had long been a piece of nothingness. It could be said that it was no longer the territory of 9 regions. God knew how Wang Lu moved it there in the blink of an eye, but it was indeed because it was not common sense that it took Xia Yu some time to lock its location. Unfortunately, it only took a little more time. You guys watch him. Xia Yu pointed to Xiaoyao and motioned the other immortals to control him. For this rebellious illegitimate child, Xia Yu was still reluctant to make a move. It was better to keep this life-prolonging dish for a while. At this time, senior immortal Xiaoyao smiled and shrugged his shoulders, indicating that he would not struggle anymore. This smile gave Xia Yu an inexplicable sense of foreboding. The premonition of the immortal king had always been accurate, but this time, Xia Yu did not follow the instructions of the premonition. He directly rushed to the Southern Heaven region, the Spirit Sword Mountain that stood in the darkness. At this moment, on the Spirit Sword Mountain, a woman in snow-white clothes was jumping on the stellar peak, as if she was stretching her muscles and bones. She held a sword in her right hand, her palm was slightly moist, and she looked a little nervous. A moment later, she looked up and showed a beautiful smile. "Hoo-hoo, I'm ready, come on." Chapter 845. On the stellar peak, the remaining forces of 9 regions had all gathered to provide the necessary support for Wang Wu in various ways. Needless to say, the treasured elixirs of the major sects, many king pills, even the king pill and yuanying that belonged to them were contributed. When Wang Wu resisted the palm of the immortal king by herself, many of the 3,000 king pills in her body were damaged. However, when she returned to the stellar peak, there were more king pills waiting for her. Some of these king pills came from the dead cultivators, and some were simply taken from the living. At this point in the battle, there was no need for anyone to hold back. In the face of the immortal king Xia Yu, if there was no equal level of power, the number was meaningless. Even if there were 10 million king pill cultivators on Spirit Sword Mountain, it was impossible to withstand a casual blow from the immortal king. At this moment, only 2 people, Wang Wu and Wang Lu, had the ability to struggle in front of the immortal king. If they couldn't hold on, the others would also die. At this time, Wang Wu looked more excited than nervous. Although her injury had not healed, the power that she could use in a short period of time had reached its peak. The 3,000 king pills were full, and the bone sword in her hand had become heavier. The core of the sword was still her own bone, but it was covered with a layer of immortal bone. It was the most precious treasure refined from the remains of immortals by the master refiners of 10,000 Arts sect. It was wrapped around the bone sword, making it sharper and stronger than before. In general, Wang Wu's power was not as pure and refined as before, but in terms of quantity, it was more than twice as much. And the work that she had to do next happened to not need to be so delicate. Right now, this state was just right. Junior sister, don't force yourself too much. At this point, the most important thing is that you can survive. There was some loneliness between the brows of Feng Yin Daoist master. Looking at the ruins on the mountain and at the foot of the mountain, his heart was at a loss. His stellar divine eyes had long been unable to see through the future, and he could not even solve the cause and effect. Whether eldest senior brother could defy the heavens and change his fate, no one could say for sure. Then, if he wanted to prepare for the worst. In the entire 9 regions, there were only 2 people who should survive. Among them, Wang Lu had integrated himself into the 9 regions and became the land spirit, so it was impossible for him to be alone. Other than him, the most suitable candidate was Wang Wu. The 3,000 king pill and her body contained various laws of 9 regions and even the western continent. Although limited by the quality of the king pill, these laws were only embryonic forms. Each embryonic form meant infinite possibilities. As long as she was alive, she would be a miniature 9 regions mobile library, a burning tinder. Besides that, she was able to cultivate the outer Tao in a short period of 200 years and go against an immortal king by herself. This natural talent and ability was probably on par with Wang Lu. Therefore, no matter what other people thought, Feng Yin hoped that Wang Wu could live on. Even if she was struggling at death's door, as long as she was alive, there was hope. Tisk, senior brother, you're spreading negative energy again. Wang Wu turned her head and wanted to laugh at her senior brother, who had been the sect leader of Spirit Sword sect for 200 years. However, looking at the aging face of Feng Yin, she suddenly couldn't bear it. She was the one who inherited the legacy of her big brother. However, over the years, most of her energy was devoted to personal cultivation, to nourish the external king pill, and to optimize the non-phase method. All the affairs of the whole Lingjian school, big and small, were supported by Feng Yin. His age was not too different from hers, but at this time, he had aged like this. Of course, Feng Yin was indeed a guy who liked to worry and was prone to premature aging. Don't worry, my life is given by him, so it won't be so easy to die. Of course, I can live. Not just me, all of us can live. In fact, we've already won this battle. Feng Yin was stunned because he could see that Wang Wu didn't seem to be joking. Instead, she really had something to rely on. What other cards does Wang Lu have in his hand? No, those are the only tricks he can use. Wang Wu shook her head. Don't think that he's omnipotent. Transforming into the spirit of 9 regions is purely out of helplessness. Moreover, it happened in a hurry, so he has no time to adapt to the new power. 9 regions burning blood and non-phase celestial cannon are just the most superficial application of the power of 9 regions. If he wants to command the whole continent like an arm, he needs to cultivate for at least a few hundred years. However, looking at the current state of 9 regions, it's estimated that he would be finished in a few hundred years. Ahaha. Feng Yin was shocked. Since the situation is so bad, how could you laugh? Wang Wu said with a smile, because our opponent is not that strong. He's just an old man who is struggling at death's door. Why do we need any new tricks to deal with him? Wang Lu's layout just now is enough. You probably didn't notice it, but Wang Lu's killer move has already been played. Killer move? There's no time to explain it to you in detail. The old guy is coming, so I'm ready to start work. With that, Wang Wu pointed her toes down. It was an understatement, but it released an infinite force, which shook the entire stellar peak. However, instead of flying straight into the sky with the force of the shock, she deeply rooted her heels into the mountain and integrated with it. In an instant, Wang Wu seemed to have become the spirit of Spirit Sword Mountain. She could absorb the power of the mountain and share the damage suffered by Spirit Sword Mountain. Wang Wu vowed to live and die with Spirit Sword Mountain. The immortal king came very quickly. For the god of war who had crossed the endless void and fought in countless worlds, 9 regions was too small. With a single thought, he could tear the space and cross thousands of rivers and mountains. Xia Yu was not worried that the Spirit Sword Mountain could escape. It was not easy for 9 regions to move an immortal mountain from one part of the continent to the other in an instant. Especially now, 9 regions could not afford to consume too much energy. Xia Yu even doubted whether Wang Lu could use the non-phase celestial cannon that he was proud of after forcibly moving the Spirit Sword Mountain. The weakness of 9 regions was visible to the naked eye, and nearly half of the Earth's spiritual veins were in a state of exhaustion. Even if 9 regions was lucky enough to escape from the Great Purge, it was only half a step away from the real age of chaos. This was really a lose-lose battle. No wonder Wang Lu would still propose reconciliation when 9 regions suffered a great disaster. Unfortunately, Xia Yu did not intend to stop here, and he could not stop here. After paying such a huge price, he could not afford to fail more than Wang Lu. After coming out of the Palace of 3 Purities, the immortal king was no longer the high and mighty king, but Xia Yu, who was the focus of attention. His every move was watched, and his every flaw was seen. After senior immortal Xiaoyao betrayed him and pointed out everything he had done in order to seek immortality, Xia Yu faced great doubts. If he was at his peak, even if he was opposed by everyone, he could still use violence to subdue them. However, Xia Yu, who was close to the end of his life, could not afford to lose too much. In a sense, he was not much different from this dilapidated 9 regions. Therefore, this time, he had to win. He had to regain their trust with a magnificent victory so that his men could continue to be obedient. And the first act of this great victory was the destruction of Spirit Sword Mountain. Xia Yu had long seen Wang Wu standing on the top of the stellar peak. He also saw the 3,000 king pill in her body and the bone sword in her hand. If it was a head-on confrontation, she was indeed a strong opponent. Her non-phase sword technique was extremely evil and simply unreasonable. Even the palm of the immortal king could not destroy it in a short time. However, the reason why the immortal king was that, in addition to his powerful strength, the more important thing was that his magical ability was mysterious. If a head-on attack didn't work, Xia Yu still had too many flexible means. His left hand lit a fire, which was the innate fire taken from the Hongmeng ruins, and his right hand was a vast expanse of white cold wind, which was a wisp of pure ice breath inherited from the Desolation Age. With the power of ice and fire yin and yang grinding, even the strongest sword defense would definitely not be able to withstand it. Xia Yu once used this trick to break through the gate of the pantheon of the Western continent. He did not believe that Wang Wu could be stronger than the former pantheon of the Western continent. However, just as Xia Yu was about to release the power of his left and right hands, he suddenly saw an undisguised, crafty smile on Wang Wu's face. The next moment, the sky behind him suddenly shone brightly, and an incomparably familiar force fell from the sky. Xia Yu didn't need to look back to know what the surging energy behind him was. Non-phase celestial cannon? How is this possible? Even if 9 regions still had hidden power, the signs before the launch of the non-phase celestial cannon were very obvious, so it was impossible for Xia Yu not to notice it. What's more, the celestial cannon should be launched from the bottom up. How could it fall from the sky? Unless, in an instant, countless pictures emerged in Xia Yu's mind, and then he quickly fixed on one of them. It was the first time that Wang Lu released the non-phase celestial cannon with all her might. At that time, although Xia Yu was a bit in a hurry, he still dodged and blocked at the critical moment, letting the power of the celestial cannon break through the sky and enter the endless void. At that time, Xia Yu didn't even think about where the energy of the celestial cannon would eventually go. Because generally speaking, no matter how powerful the power was, once it was lost in the endless void, it would inevitably be exhausted. Now that he thought about it, from that time on, Wang Lu had quietly set up a trap. The celestial cannon broke through the sky and entered the endless void. It was a mysterious place where time and space had lost their meaning. Of course, it was very likely that the energy of the celestial cannon would be lost in it forever, but it was also possible that, after a period of time, it suddenly changed its direction in the endless void and came back to 9 regions. Xia Yu still couldn't figure out how to do this. It was probably to use the sky tower on the stellar peak to tear the space barrier and guide the energy of the celestial cannon back to 9 regions. This was the only reason that could explain it. Similarly, on the Spirit Sword Mountain, it was easy to understand that Wang Wu put on a fight to the death posture. She didn't want to fight against the immortal king, but to block the aftermath of the celestial cannon that fell from the sky. After all, it was directly guided to the stellar peak. Unfortunately, Xia Yu understood it a bit too late. The power of the celestial cannon had completely enveloped him. Xia Yu couldn't avoid it and could only confront it head-on. The innate fire in his left hand and the ice breath in his right hand were exhausted in an instant, and then his immortal robe, as well as the flesh and blood under the robe, in the huge torrent of energy, Xia Yu roared, "Wang Lu, good plan." "Ha ha ha, you're welcome." Chapter 846. Xia Yu was in a sea of fire. The fire was the anger of 9 regions, the anger of being repeatedly invaded by the immortal world for tens of thousands of years, the anger of the destruction of the ancient southern heaven region, and the anger of the sudden interruption of the long sleep. This was the first time Xia Yu had tasted the wrath of a world, and the flames were much more intense than he had imagined. The moment he was in the sea of fire, his body that had been tempered hundreds and thousands of times and was close to flawless began to melt rapidly, and the immortal spirit that covered his body also disappeared. He couldn't dodge, he couldn't evade, and he had no way to block it. Immortal King Xia Yu, who had dominated the myriad realms, was slowly dying in the sea of fire of the heaven-blasting cannon. In the sea of fire, Xia Yu heard the wails of billions of resentful spirits. Those were the souls of those who had died since the arrival of the celestial world. At this moment, they poured the most vicious curses on Xia Yu, corroding his immortal body. In the sea of fire, Xia Yu saw the collapse of the sky and the destruction of all things. It was the curse cast by the souls of the dead in the southern heaven region that was destroyed by the reverse Gisaurus pillar. The power of the curse of the earth was infinite. In an instant, it damaged the immortal mansion inside Xia Yu's body, and countless immortal mountains and jade stones collapsed. The immortal's mansion inside the immortal's body was the foundation of cultivation. The revenge of the southern heaven region almost damaged Xia Yu's foundation. In the sea of fire, Xia Yu also saw his old opponents from the War of 10,000 Worlds. There were gods of the western continent, as well as strange creatures from different realms. They either cursed at him, loudly ridiculed him, or simply came to cut his flesh with sharp weapons, bringing him endless pain like a tide. This was the fire of the heart, and it was also the demon of the heart. The appearance of the mortal enemy meant that the anger of Jojo had seeped into Xia Yu's primordial spirit, and it began to work together from inside and outside to disintegrate his existence. Even an immortal king would not be able to hold on for long in such a scorching flame. However, at this time, Xia Yu could only silently bear the heavy pressure of destruction. After being hit head-on by the non-phase celestial cannon, his immortal king magical power almost instantly disintegrated. At this time, even if he wanted to escape from the sea of fire at all costs, he was powerless. However, there was still a chance to turn things around. Xia Yu calmly looked down. Through the blazing flames, his eyes fell on Spirit Sword Mountain. Over there was another person struggling to hold on. Tisk, why is that old bastard not dead yet? On the stellar peak, Wang Wu held her sword with one hand and held up a milky white dome above her head. Above the dome, the endless sea of fire poured down like a waterfall, but it was intercepted by the non-phase sword halfway. However, the sea of fire was ruthless and endless. It constantly battered Wang Wu's sword defense, making it more and more difficult for her to support it. But she had no choice but to persevere. When Wang Lu released the full power attack of the non-phase celestial cannon, he mixed it with the Spirit Sword Heavenly Talisman. Then, with Spirit Sword Mountain as a beacon, the non-phase celestial cannon in the endless void was guided back to 9 regions. As long as they cut open the spatial barrier at the right place and ensured that the Immortal King was between the gap in the barrier and the stellar peak. Then, even the Immortal King would not be able to avoid falling into the trap. This was the plan that Wang Lu had formulated before he returned to 9 regions. A considerable part of it was risky, and a slight mistake would lead to a complete loss. For example, how to ensure that the celestial cannon would not be permanently lost after entering the endless void? How to ensure that Xia Yu would not find out the truth from the beginning to the end and thus avoid the surprise attack from behind? The most important thing was that there was a huge loophole in this 3-point and 1-line plan. The power of the non-phase celestial cannon was endless, so how to ensure that this power was blocked by the Immortal King and not directly fell on the head of Spirit Sword Mountain? In fact, of course, there was no inevitable guarantee for these matters. What Wang Lu could do was to arrange a few insurances at every step. As for whether it would work or not, it could only be left to fate. After all, if he didn't take risks, how could he make up for the huge strength gap between him and the Immortal King? Fortunately, the plan finally advanced smoothly to the last step. However, this last step was more difficult than all the previous steps combined. The most worrying situation finally happened. In the 3-point and 1-line plan, the Immortal King in the center did not absorb all the power of the non-phase celestial cannon. About 30% of the power bypassed the Immortal King and directly descended on Spirit Sword Mountain. This non-phase celestial cannon came from the endless void and relied on the positioning of Spirit Sword Mountain to maintain its cohesion. However, if it was hit head-on, the Spirit Sword Mountain would be destroyed in an instant. The non-phase celestial cannon would also collapse because of the loss of guidance, and Xia Yu, who was trapped in the sea of fire, would immediately be free. At that time, even if Xia Yu had been seriously injured by the non-phase celestial cannon, by virtue of his absolute advantage in stage, no one could control him. Therefore, according to Wang Lu's plan, Xia Yu must be completely killed in one go. Before he fell, the impact of the non-phase celestial cannon must not stop. And as the most important insurance on Spirit Sword Mountain, Wang Wu's sword must not have the slightest mistake. The pressure that Wang Wu was under could be imagined. After an unknown amount of time, the pillar of fire that descended from the void was still pouring down. The woman felt that her wrist had become numb. She could not help but raise her head anxiously and look at the Immortal King in the sea of fire. She saw that although he was in a sorry state and his immortal body had disintegrated by a small part, his posture was still as firm as a reef in the big waves. Tisk, those who can live for 100,000 years are really not easy to deal with. At such an old age, they are still so strong. Presumably, they have been tempered in the harem. As soon as her voice fell, a crisp sound burst out from the dome above her. Wang Wu's complexion changed, and she hastily extracted more true yuan from her body and poured it into the white bone sword. Only then was she able to make up for the gap. It was just that this time, she exerted too much force, and many of the originally stable 3,000 king pills suddenly began to become restless. After all, not all of them were original goods, so there were shortcomings in stability and compatibility. If Wang Lu hadn't explained the various characteristics of the non-phase celestial cannon to her in advance, so that she could calmly lay out a targeted line of defense. In the face of the 30% power of the non-phase celestial cannon, Wang Wu's sword defense would have been broken long ago. Xia Yu, oh, Xia Yu, please die quickly. This is considered a good deed, okay? Of course, Wang Wu's call did not have any effect. On the contrary, Xia Yu seemed to have gradually adapted to the bombardment of the non-phase celestial cannon. Although his body was still constantly disintegrating, the remaining parts began a new round of rejuvenation. His loose skin and flesh became compact, and his silver hair gradually turned black. The magical power that belonged to the Immortal King was returning little by little. Of course, compared to Xia Yu's recovery speed, the speed of destruction was a little faster. In this way, before he had time to recover to his peak, he would definitely die without a burial place. But Xia Yu's unexpected rejuvenation greatly slowed down the pace of destruction. And considering that Xia Yu had a chance to turn the tables at any time before he was completely annihilated. Therefore, Wang Wu, who was at the top of the star peak, had to persevere to the end. In this regard, Wang Wu could only smile bitterly and said, Wang Lu, that B*TCH, didn't say that this job was so hard before. I thought that as long as I persisted for 3 to 5 breaths of time, it would be enough. But now, what's the difference between me and Xia Yu? And if this goes on, I'm afraid that my side will be finished first. Wang Lu, you swindler, even after becoming the spirit of 9 regions, you still won't change. As soon as her voice fell, Wang Lu's voice sounded in her heart. TSK, how wonderful do you expect me to be in this kind of plan that involves the immortal king? It's already amazing enough to be able to calculate this step, okay? Wang Wu responded, then I'll have to trouble you to think of another earth-shattering method to help me hold on for a while longer. I really can't hold on any longer. Well, I know, I'm thinking, a moment later. Well, I've thought of one. It was obviously good news, but Wang Lu's voice didn't sound happy at all. Wang Wu, get ready, to say goodbye to Spirit Sword Mountain. Chapter 847. Say goodbye to Spirit Sword Mountain. You're really worthy. You can even come up with this kind of desperate plan. Wang Wu understood and absorbed Wang Lu's overall plan in an instant, and then she was amazed. Wang Lu's idea was very simple. Right now, whether it was the immortal king or Wang Wu, they were just struggling to hold on and were only one step away from collapse. Then, as long as this step was taken, all the problems would be solved. Of course, in this kind of big battle between 9 regions and the immortal king, there were very few people who were qualified to take this step. Even if an immortal was close to the Sea of Fire, he would be roasted inside. Qinglu, Lifeng, and other senior immortals might be able to get closer, but they couldn't get close to the core. The only one who had the ability to intervene in all this was Xiaoyao, but how could Xiaoyao come to help Xia Yu? On the contrary, he single-handedly restrained many people around him and rendered them unable to move. At this moment, in 9 regions, only Wang Lu was qualified to take this step. Most of his power was used to maintain the output of the non-phase celestial cannon, so he basically had no time to care about other things. However, he also had the identity of the spirit of 9 regions, which could control all the famous mountains and rivers in the world, and Spirit Sword Mountain was no exception. What Wang Lu had to do was to separate a little bit of power to uproot Spirit Sword Mountain from the ground, and then throw it like a hidden weapon to smash Xia Yu's face. In theory, this was indeed an excellent method. Although Spirit Sword Mountain was not born for hidden weapons, the spiritual power contained in the mountain was extremely abundant. Once it erupted, the sky would fall and the earth would crack. When Xia Yu was tired of dealing with the non-phase celestial cannon, it could play the role of the last straw and immediately solve the dilemma in front of him. However, the price was really tragic. After all, this was not a nameless barren mountain, but one of the most valuable spiritual mountains in 9 regions. It was also the core of 9 regions. At the same time, it was also the home of Wang Wu and Wang Lu. They were cultivators who had cut off their ties with the mortal world and entered the immortal path. The mortal family had long been meaningless. Spirit Sword Mountain was their real home. This mountain carried too many memories and thoughts. Even though the Spirit Sword Mountain had been riddled with holes in the previous battle, the main peak still stood tall, and the mountain was still full of the hopes of countless people. So you just treat Spirit Sword Mountain as a consumable? After becoming the land spirit of 9 regions, he has already become ruthless towards his original place of belonging. What a tasteless man. **T. It's not your turn to question me with such a stupid question as the record holder of the 9 regions. Don't forget, I regard myself as a consumable. What's a mere Spirit Sword Mountain? After a pause, Wang Lu said in Wang Wu's mind, moreover, I am now the spirit of 9 regions. If Spirit Sword Mountain is destroyed, I can move Kunlun Mountain to repay the debt. Zhou Mumu will hate you to death. It doesn't matter, I'll give them the old home of Xingjing sect. Hey, you're indebted to old Taoist Tuesday, then I have to give Royal Soldiers sect to Xingjing sect people. In any case, the people of Royal Soldiers sect are all heroes, so they should be able to get through after setting up a tent. Not to mention that this deal is completely unfair, it can't make up for the loss of Xingjing sect people. Moreover, just because the lead disciple of Royal Soldiers sect is a man, you're not going to give them any compensation? After sighing, Wang Wu's expression became serious. Do what you want to do, you know I will definitely support you. Yeah, no matter how much benefit I get, it's now considered as the property of the couple, right? Hee, even if you say that, I won't blush, so don't talk nonsense. If you want to do it, then hurry up. I really can't hold on here. With that last sentence, Wang Wu took a deep breath. This was also the last breath that she could take into her body at present. Under the cleansing of the aftermath of the non-phase celestial cannon, her internal organs began to rupture, and the 3000 king pill was no longer round. It became dim and irritable, as if it could jump out of the Jade Mansion at any time and tear Wang Wu apart. Her time was only very, very short, and similarly, the time that belonged to 9 regions was also very, very short. Even when Wang Wu looked up, she could see the relieved smile on Xia Yu's face. Old fool, what are you laughing at? Wang Wu very extravagantly used her remaining breath to curse. The next moment, the rocks under her feet shook, and endless lifting force emerged. Spirit Sword Mountain began to fly up from the bottom to the sky. As the spirit of 9 regions, moving the land of 9 regions was as natural as lifting a hand. Even though the 9 regions was extremely weak at this time, it was still easy to gather the last bit of strength to push Spirit Sword Mountain up. In the twinkling of an eye, Spirit Sword Mountain left the ground and flew up at an amazing speed. The distance with Xia Yu rapidly shortened, and in this short moment, Wang Wu stood on the top of the mountain, still supporting the sword defense to ensure that Spirit Sword Mountain could collide with Xia Yu in the most perfect posture. At the same time, her attention gradually diverted to other places. Looking around, she looked down at the Spirit Sword Mountain for the last time. At this moment, the mountain had already been cleared. Feng Yin, Lu Xian, Fang He, and other cultivators who gathered here to fight against the fallen immortals had been teleported out by Wang Lu's array in the mountain, far away so as not to be buried with them. The once lively and bustling Spirit Sword Mountain had become extremely quiet. Vaguely, Wang Wu felt as if she had returned to 200 years ago. At that time, the Lingjian school had just experienced the biggest disaster. The elites of the school were almost wiped out, and it was also empty and lonely. In the empty mountain, Wang Wu saw the place where she played when she was young, the place where her master used to teach, the grove where she used to hide and peek at her big brother, and the wreckage of the non-phase peak that had accompanied her for many years. For a time, even with her temperament, she couldn't help but sigh. The world is changeable and unpredictable. Spirit Sword Mountain has been established for thousands of years and has experienced the vicissitudes of life. Unexpectedly, it has come to an end here. Hey, wait, I seem to have forgotten something important. In an instant, Spirit Sword Mountain was only 300 meters away from Xia Yu, and the panic on the face of the immortal king was clear. Wait, I understand. We can mind our own business. I'll return to the immortal world. There's no need for both sides to suffer. The thought of the immortal king resounded in all directions in the shortest possible time. However, of course, it received a ridicule from Wang Lu. Old fool, I was very merciful and proposed to wipe your face outside and never go in, but you didn't agree. Now you're about to explode and you still want to leave? How could it be that easy? Xia Yu's face instantly turned livid, because the immortal king's divine eyes had already seen the future that was about to happen. There was no room for mediation, and there was no possibility of change. The immortal king who had dominated the world was doomed to die here. However, Wang Wu sneered and said, "Well done, the last memory of a dignified immortal king is your dirty joke. But with your face, you have the nerve to criticize me as the record holder of the lower limit? Don't forget, I inherited your legacy." While speaking, Wang Wu's mind suddenly flashed and she realized the problem that she had ignored. What the hell, what should I do after the big collision? Wang Lu could activate the array to transfer everyone else away, but Wang Wu could not. And being sandwiched between the Immortal King and the Spirit Sword Mountain, Wang Wu did not think that she could afford the pleasure of being sandwiched between the Immortal King and the Spirit Sword Mountain. Wang Lu, Wang Lu, Wang Lu, don't be a hooligan, hurry up and save people. In the exclamation and even the scream of Wang Wu, the most important collision in tens of thousands of years in 9 regions detonated. The earth-shattering explosion from the southern heaven region almost distorted the 9 regions. In the several regions closest to the southern heaven region, nearly half of the land was swept by the strong light and the shock wave. The closest location even experienced a violent earthquake that lasted for half an hour. The ground rippled like water, making a vibration with an amplitude of hundreds of meters, and all the tangible and intangible things were torn apart. Even if it was the farthest place from the southern heaven region, there would still be a strong earthquake. The impact was not only along the earth, but also transmitted from the feng shui line to all parts of the 9 regions, forming many mountains and basins, rivers and lakes. At the same time, the news of the fall of the immortal King Xia Yu spread to all directions. All the creatures in the 9 regions had a glimmer of understanding from the bottom of their hearts. A certain powerful enemy had disappeared forever. This was the high-profile victory declaration made by the spirit of 9 regions. After the big explosion, Wang Lu directly engraved the result in everyone's heart. It was also the strange phenomenon caused by the collapse of the law around the immortal king when he fell. No matter how muddle-headed Xia Yu was in his old age, he was, after all, the immortal king with the highest cultivation base in the myriad worlds. After the big explosion, there were no bones left of him, and the energy and consciousness that had been accumulated for 100,000 years dissipated. Many animals that were trembling in the cave walked out one after another. They looked up at the sky that was blooming with extraordinary colors and felt the unprecedented clear sunlight. Then, they could not help but become wild with joy. The monsters who had already opened their spiritual wisdom realized that there would be good fortune after surviving a disaster. Thus, they hurriedly seized the time to absorb the scattered energy between heaven and earth. This was the relic of the immortal king, which was infinitely wonderful. Even if it was only a trivial trace, it was enough to produce countless miracles. The wild animals who had not opened their spiritual wisdom also had their own way of celebrating. Most of the animals directly entered the estrus period and solved the problem of reproduction in the wildest way. As for the mortals, their reactions were different. Some were revelers, some took advantage of the chaos, and so on. Of course, in addition to this, the cultivators of 9 regions also realized that the battle had finally come to an end. In particular, when they saw the once famous immortals, they looked as if they had just lost their parents and were walking dead, which was even more conclusive. How could this be? Senior Immortal Feng Yun looked at the sky in disbelief. His whole body trembled, and he couldn't even restrain his immortal spirit from collapsing. Your Majesty, you. Senior Immortal Qinglu shook her head with a sad look on her face. Only Senior Immortal Xiaoyao seemed to have fallen to the ground. He sighed softly and said, after so many hardships, this world has finally survived. Chapter 848. On the green grassland, a white tombstone quietly faced the breeze. There was no word above the tombstone, but it was full of the vicissitudes of time. A young man stood silently in front of the tombstone. His eyes were filled with both compassion and relief. A man and a tombstone stood facing each other. No matter how many days and nights passed, the tombstone was still standing on the grass, and the man did not move an inch. It was as if he would stand there forever, even if the earth grew old and the sky became desolate. Until the arrival of an uninvited guest broke the silence here. The man had white hair, wrinkled face, and slightly bent back, which showed his old age. Only his pair of eyes were still as sharp as the autumn water. At his waist was a long sword, which was as bright as the Milky Way, indicating the identity of this person. He was the head of Lingjian School, the successor of the stellar sword method, Feng Yin Daoist master. You're still here? Hearing the voice behind him, the young man seemed to wake up from a dream. He turned his head and reluctantly put on a polite smile on his face, but he couldn't even say a word of greeting. Feng Yin Daoist master didn't say much. He just took 2 steps forward and stood side by side with the young man, silently watching the blank tombstone. After a long time, Feng Yin sighed. Gods will make fun of people. The young man was stunned, and then his face showed bitterness. God's will? I don't believe in God's will all my life, and I don't believe in God's will. However, today, if it's not God's will making fun of people, how could things end up like this? Before I came, Feng Yin softly said, I wanted to say my condolences to you, but when I thought of what this person did, I couldn't say it. The young man closed his eyes and also sighed. In the second half of Xia Yu's life, he did all kinds of evil things. Even I, his son, wanted to rebel against him. He really doesn't deserve any condolences. I should thank you for leaving this cemetery for him in this reborn southern heaven region. Feng Yin said, Xia Yu is, after all, the leader of the immortal path. In the first half of his life, he was wise and powerful, and made outstanding military achievements. The immortal world was once the dream of us 9 regions cultivators. Let this tombstone be a tribute to the immortal world, to the dream of cultivation. That's right. There's no immortal realm left. It's impossible for a new immortal realm to be born in the great 1,000 worlds. At this point, both of them could not help but fall silent. After a long time, Feng Yin asked, what do you plan to do after this? Was he really going to explore the Wall of Worlds? Actually, you don't have to. Senior Immortal Xiaoyao interrupted, I know. I am very grateful that you can accept me, a defeated prisoner, regardless of the former enmity. However, 9 regions is not my home. I am different from those immortals who ascended from 9 regions. I was born in the immortal world and grew up in the immortal world. The immortal world has been destroyed. Although this world is big, there is no place for me. Moreover, the longer I stay here, the harder it will be for me to bear the torment of my conscience. So, please forgive me for rejecting your kind intentions. Feng Yin was a little regretful. However, the Wall of Worlds, well, the Wall of Worlds is dangerous. Even with Xia Yu's strength, he doesn't have much confidence in breaking through it. I'm probably going to die on this trip. Xiaoyao said with a smile, however, I have no regrets in dying on the eve of the new world. What's more, I have someone to accompany me on this trip, so I won't be lonely. While speaking, a beautiful figure floated over from afar. It was a slender and light woman with a glittering and translucent gem in the center of her forehead. Her eyebrows were indifferent with a smile, and she was extremely beautiful. When Feng Yin saw the woman, he raised his eyebrows in surprise and said, she is my wife, Yan Luo. Senior Immortal Xiaoyao gently stated her identity and stopped Feng Yin's intention to continue to ask with a firm look. Feng Yin did have a lot of doubts in his heart. Yan Luo, the commander of the immortal world's slave army, should have died in the hands of Wang Lu. Even her body was broken and incomplete. Later, although it was recovered by Xiaoyao, the dead could not be resurrected. So, what was this Yan Luo? What's more, wasn't the love of Senior Immortal Xiaoyao Xia Xiaohe? Why did he call Yan Luo his wife? However, out of respect for Xiaoyao, Feng Yin did not look for the root of the problem, nor did he open his stellar divine eyes to see the real situation of Yan Luo. Senior Immortal Xiaoyao saluted Feng Yin again and said in a clear voice, I have been delayed here for long enough. I will go with my wife. I hope to see you in the new world in my lifetime. When we meet again, I will prepare good wine and delicious food. Then, Senior Immortal Xiaoyao took Yan Luo's hand, flew in the air, and soon disappeared into the sky. Feng Yin looked at their backs in the distance, and after a long time, he sighed again. It was just that before the sigh fell, he heard someone snorting coldly behind him. Humph, this bastard is about to die, but he still has a sharp tongue. Hearing this voice, Feng Yin quickly turned around and cupped his hands. Golden King, you're here too? Humph. The blonde and red-eyed Golden King glanced at Feng Yin with some disgust and said, you hypocritical bastards, you know that he won't live long. Why do you still insist on keeping him here? If he wants to die in the Wall of Worlds, just let him be. Feng Yin smiled and didn't say much. He was very clear about the purpose of Golden King's visit. When the group of immortals besieged Spirit Sword Mountain, Golden King almost single-handedly propped up the line of defense. Then he was knocked down by senior immortal Xiaoyao and seriously injured. For the arrogant Golden King, that battle was simply a great shame and humiliation. Although everyone thought that it was great for him to fight against a god-level immortal as a demigod, Golden King himself was obviously not satisfied. Therefore, the resentment in his heart towards senior immortal Xiaoyao could be imagined. Feng Yin came to say goodbye to Xiaoyao, and Golden King also came to say goodbye in another form. Unfortunately, Feng Yin came early enough to intercept all the plans of Golden King, so that he could only curse a few words to vent his anger. A patricide short-lived ghost, coupled with a corpse girl that fuses two personalities, it's a good death-seeking combination. As a result, before Golden King could finish his words, he felt a chill behind his back. Is this your magnanimity as the Golden King, Gil? Golden King's face suddenly twisted and tangled, and then he squeezed out a few words from his teeth, Night King. What are you doing here? Aya was silent. Her clear blue eyes quietly watched the Golden King. And this silence made Golden King more and more uncomfortable. Humph. I know. I'm going to prepare for the expedition, but don't even think about running away. You're the main commander in the expedition to the Western continent. Aya raised her eyebrows and said, when did I say I'm going to run away? Besides, you said I'm the main commander, then what are you? My boss? Golden King was unable to speak for a long time. Finally, he turned around and left with a look of exasperation on his face. After Golden King left, Aya stood silently in front of the tombstone for a while, feeling a little melancholy in her heart. The immortal world had been destroyed, and the Pantheon was actually just a dying struggle, struggling at death's door. Even if there was no expedition organized by Golden King, it was only a matter of time before it was destroyed. This old world really didn't have much time left. It was not a bad move for senior immortal Xiaoyao to choose to die in the Wall of Worlds. At least, he would be remembered as a great pioneer, although the fact that he carried a corpse girl with him was a bit. For the current 9 regions, there was no time to slowly rebuild after the war. In less than 100 years, 9 regions must begin to migrate and break through the Wall of Worlds and enter the new world before its own lifespan was exhausted. There were countless challenges to be faced. Winning the victory against the immortal world was actually just the beginning, and the real test was yet to come. However, the most difficult hurdle had been passed, and the next hurdle must be infinite light. Aya looked up at the sun sky and smiled slightly. For the sake of this peaceful sun sky, countless people had sacrificed their lives, and their sacrifice would not become meaningless. Don't worry, your sacrifice will not become meaningless. At the same time, on an unknown mountain in 9 regions, there was a bamboo room and a crystal-like lake. There was a nameless stone tablet beside the lake. In front of the tablet, a woman in white sat on the ground, her eyes full of sadness. The post-war reconstruction work has gone smoothly. Although this fierce war has greatly damaged the vitality of 9 regions, there are still a lot of things to be done, but we can see a prosperous atmosphere. The great unification of 9 regions, which has not been seen for tens of thousands of years, has finally been achieved. Even the destroyed Southern Heaven region has been reborn in just a few months. I believe that in less than 100 years, we can be ready for migration. The woman whispered and then picked up the wine gourd and drank for half a day. So, you can rest assured that 9 regions will have a bright and beautiful future. It will. So, you can go in peace. I will take good care of your legacy, including the treasures that have been buried in 9 regions for many years, including your wisdom sect that has an amazing ability to accumulate wealth, including little Luli, Zhu Shiyao. Before she finished speaking, the blue sky and white clouds above her head suddenly turned black, and a thick thunderbolt fell from the sky. Bitch, I'm supervising the work in the Southern Heaven region. It's fine if you're lazy and don't work hard, but you're also cursing me here? Chapter 849. All troops, attack. In the vast desert, Xiang Liang, dressed in golden armor, held a flag and a spear and issued a declaration of decisive battle to the Western Continent army in the sky. Behind Xiang Liang was a large army mixed with Western Continent people, 9 regions people, and even creatures from the special world. Following Xiang Liang's order, they mightily rushed to the other side of the desert. This was an expeditionary army from 9 regions that crossed the endless sea. Although they had just experienced a fierce battle with the immortal world, most of the soldiers had not recovered from their injuries. Bandages and plasters could be seen everywhere in the gaps of their armors. Although their appearance was far from gorgeous, their morale was high and completely above their opponents. The gods of the pantheon had indeed unified the Western Continent early on. However, this kind of rule based on sucking the marrow out of the bones obviously could not last long. After Golden King was defeated and retreated to 9 regions, the resistance forces in the Western Continent sprang up like bamboo shoots after a spring rain. Then, of course, they were ruthlessly suppressed by the gods. Several times, the Western Continent people, like domesticated wolves, lost their blood and became completely like meat dogs, waiting to be slaughtered. In the face of such an opponent, even if 9 regions came up with a group of defeated soldiers, they would still have an overall advantage. Not to mention that most of the people in the expeditionary army had gained a lot of benefits when the immortal king fell. Although their injuries had not yet healed, their strength and stage had been improved. The confrontation between the 2 armies only took half a day to determine the outcome of the battle. The Western Continent army was completely routed. Xiang Liang mercilessly gave the order to pursue and kill the enemy. They chased the enemy for thousands of miles and completely annihilated them. After the war, the expeditionary army reveled for 3 days to celebrate this decisive victory. Only Xiang Liang looked lonely and there was no joy on his face. When asked, he could only smile bitterly without saying anything. The victory was certainly a victory, but the victory was just a cold leftover. The real feast had already been enjoyed by the others long ago. Before the expeditionary army landed in the Western Continent, Aya and Golden King had led a few elites of the expeditionary army directly to the pantheon and cut the group of gods who were sucking the marrow out of the bones. That battle was really earth-shattering. Although Golden King and Aya were the nominal leaders, their cultivation base was not high in the battlefield. The real main force was Wang Wu, who had restored the 3,000 king pill, and the people of the immortal world who surrendered to 9 regions. With these strong soldiers and fierce generals, the pantheon, which was once comparable to the immortal world, was smashed into the mortal world by the people of 9 regions, creating a terrifying pit in the Western Continent. Even the surrounding thousands of miles were corroded by the fallen pantheon and turned into a desert. As for the army commanded by Xiang Liang, it was more like a sweeper after the war. It could not be said that it was meaningless, but it was obviously not comparable to the battle in the pantheon. When he thought that he inherited the flag of the strongest army in 9 regions, but could not show his skill on the real battlefield, Xiang Liang naturally did not feel happy. However, the current royal soldier sect really could not afford a heavier burden. In the war against the immortal world, royal soldier sect suffered the most losses. Twice they formed the Red Guards, and both times they were nearly wiped out. The tragedy of royal soldier sect was comparable to the catastrophe of Spirit Sword Mountain. The reason why Xiang Liang was able to shoulder the position of the sect leader was also because those loyal ministers who had assisted Kuchin had long since died. After 3 days of revelry, Xiang Liang led the army back to 9 regions. After a long sigh with a mysterious person, his fighting spirit was rekindled. However, in the past, the ancestors could cut through the thistles and thorns and lay the foundation of royal soldier sect, so why can't I do it again in my hands? The Western Continent expedition is just the beginning. In the New World, there must be endless battles waiting for me. The Western Continent expedition was a disaster for the Pantheon and even the Western Continent. However, in the eyes of many people in 9 regions, it was just an episode in the post-war reconstruction. After defeating the immortal king, the self-confidence of the people of 9 regions completely exploded, and they didn't put the people of Western Continent in their eyes at all. However, the significance of this expedition was very far-reaching. First, it was to cut off the last worry. From then on, no one in the world could threaten the safety of 9 regions. Second, as a spoil of war, the Western continent was actually very fertile. Although because of the face of Golden King, there was no way to directly merge this continent together, after the Western continent was plundered by the Pantheon, Golden King often felt bored with this land that was no longer complete. Coupled with the bait that a certain spirit of 9 regions constantly threw out, it seemed like abandoning his hometown to merge with 9 regions was just around the corner. With the Western continent, the next major plan of 9 regions would have a bit more chance of success. Above the clouds in 10,000 Art Sect. In the position that once belonged to Supreme Tian Luan, there was now a young figure. However, compared with Supreme Tian Luan, who was always calm and collected, the temper of this successor seemed to be very violent. He kept roaring at a communication talisman. Is there a new calculation task? We haven't finished the backlog of tasks from half a month ago, and now there's a new one. How many batches is this? It's the 13th batch. Are you trying to force people to die? Is the life of an intellectual not a life? Tell Wang Lu not to push his luck. We, the people of 10,000 Arts Sect, are engaged in academic research, not his human calculator. If he wants to calculate the best path to cross the wall of worlds, let him do it himself. After roaring, Zhang Zai took a breath, and then his expression gradually became cold. Countless numbers and symbols flashed in front of his eyes, and his mouth also muttered something. The whole cloud began to flash with lightning, responding to his command at the fastest speed. Zhou Mumu, who watched all this from the side, couldn't help but laugh. Pfft, you belong to the type of person who says no, but your body is very honest. On one hand, you complain that Wang Lu has made you a cow and a horse, but on the other hand, you can't help but see the calculation task that he gave you. Zhang Zai snorted. This is academic spirit, what do you know? Although he said that, his tone involuntarily softened. If the current 10,000 Art Sect saw this, they would definitely sigh with emotion that the 10,000 motionless immortal heart of this new sect leader must have been cultivated to a dog's body. Zhou Mumu couldn't help but laugh. Ha ha ha, good, good, good. You're good at academics. Then I'll give you a problem, why don't you calculate it? Zhang Zai was very confident in this kind of provocation in his field of expertise. Let me hear it. What day do you think is better for our wedding? Poof. On the other side, in the center of the 9 regions, Qianghua slowly walked down the altar. There were still a few beads of sweat on her forehead. Even with her current strength, the sacrificial ceremony just now was still extremely strenuous, because it should have been completed by a supreme-level powerhouse like He Tuesday. Although she inherited the position of sect leader of He Tu, and in terms of pure fighting ability, she didn't lose too much to He Tu, but her essence was, after all, far worse than a real supreme. Naturally, many of her fellow sect members were puzzled by this. Jianghu, who had now been promoted to the position of elder, asked, Senior Sister Sect Leader, right now, there are many things to do in the immortal sect, so there's no need to waste too much time and energy on the sacrificial ceremony of the 9 regions, right? Qianghua lightly glanced at him. Do you think it's not necessary? Being stared at by her, Jianglu suddenly felt guilty. You just think that Xingjing sect shouldn't be so submissive to someone? Jianglu, haven't you seen where the future of Xingjing sect lies? Cold sweat kept pouring down from Jianglu's forehead, but at this moment, he had no choice but to boldly say, but Xingjing sect has always been unyielding, even if the cooperation with Wang Lu can benefit the common people, do you still have to maintain the face of Xingjing sect and resist to the end? Right now, Wang Lu needs Xingjing sect, but Xingjing sect needs Wang Lu even more. I know that some of these words are not your original intention, but some people pushed you out. Go back and tell them that I don't want to hear anyone make any similar sound again, understand? After sending away Jianglu, Qianghua stood on the altar for a long time. Just now, those words were naturally said to someone, but it seemed that he had no intention to respond. In recent years, he spoke less and less. Most of the time, he just listened. Perhaps this was inevitable. To transform a living person into a land spirit, especially a huge thing like the 9 regions, it was almost inevitable that he would be assimilated by the earth and lose his humanity. Thinking of this, Jianghua was somewhat sad. Her relationship with Wang Lu had never been harmonious. However, losing such an opponent really made her feel lonely. Wang Lu, if you really want to stop at the level of the land spirit of 9 regions. When we reach the new world, I will surpass you. Chapter 850. 100 years passed by like a white steed. Looking back, the earth-shattering war had arrived on the 100-year anniversary. A lot of things happened in the past 100 years. Some of the once all-powerful people still stood on the stage of 9 regions, some quietly retired, and some changed their ambition halfway, writing off the glory of the first half of their lives. Qianghua stood on the podium of the 100-year anniversary and looked down at the tens of thousands of cultivators who gathered below. Suddenly, there was endless emotion in her heart. Fortunately, in the supreme stage, her immortal heart was clear and free of dirt, which allowed her to suppress the palpitation in her heart and play the role of the leader of the Wanxian League. Under the focus of countless people, Qianghua gently opened her mouth and recited the speech that had already been prepared. She recalled the invasion of the immortal world 100 years ago, when countless people with lofty ideals shed their blood and finally turned the tide. Among them, there were not only the brilliance of a few heroes, but also the silent dedication of all living beings in 9 regions. She also recalled the glorious achievements of the post-war reconstruction of 9 regions in the past 100 years. The southern heaven region was reshaped, the disordered spiritual veins in various places were resorted, and the broken mountains and rivers were repaired. The new generation of cultivators grew up one after another. What was even more gratifying was that in the past 100 years, geniuses and heroes emerged one after another. After that, Qianghua talked about the next 100 years. The journey to the new world had begun. Xiaoyao, the pioneer who left 9 regions 100 years ago, successfully left a precious road sign in the Wall of Worlds, which guided future generations to move forward on the main path. 50 years ago, Zhang Zai and Zhou Mumu worked hard to complete the preliminary calculation of the Wall of Worlds. 10 years ago, Immortal Feng Yin of Lingjian School led many immortals to open a gap in the Wall of Worlds at the cost of 1,000 years of deep sleep, from which the dawn of the new world poured out, which was called the One-Line Sky. 5 years ago, Senior Immortal Nanfei's went deep into the One-Line Sky alone and expanded the gap 10 times, which almost formed a broad path. However, after completing the feat, there was no news of Senior Immortal Nanfei's. Today, Qianghua stood on the podium of the 100-year anniversary and announced the official start of the expedition to the New World. Under the podium, the cheers were deafening. In the past 100 years, the legend of the New World had long been deeply rooted in people's hearts. It was said that there was an ideal land beyond the Wall of Worlds that was better than the immortal world, with countless resources and wealth that could satisfy all beautiful fantasies. The celestial world was destroyed, but the new world became the new celestial world. It became the supreme place in people's hearts. On the stage, Qianghua felt sad. There was no ideal village. Everything in the new world was unknown. At present, Senior Immortal Nanfei's, who was the deepest in the Wall of Worlds, still had not sent back any message, and Senior Immortal Xiaoyao did not see any beautiful fantasy at the end of his journey 100 years ago. What's more, there were countless difficulties and obstacles before arriving at the new world. The journey to the new world was not a journey for a small number of people, but the migration of the entire 9 regions. The space requirement was extremely harsh. Even the most mature One-Line Sky could only accommodate the compressed 9 regions and barely pass smoothly. Once the mature region was crossed, the cultivators would have to overcome the obstacles. According to Zhang Zai's calculations, the most ideal outcome was to maintain the current development intensity for 500 years. After that, there was an 80% chance that a spacious passageway would be directly excavated. However, that was, of course, impossible. 9 regions had long been overwhelmed. In the last 100 years, the emergence of heroes was basically the final radiance of the setting sun, and the surrounding spiritual energy was also constantly decreasing. How could a world that was already on the brink of death be filled with vitality? In recent decades, no one had heard the voice of the land's spirit Wang Lu. He was still there, but he was so tired and weak that he couldn't even speak. Senior immortal non-phase entering the one-line sky alone was also related to the weakness of Wang Lu. Looking at the spirit stone statue of Wang Lu in the center of the ceremonial platform, Qionghua's heart was filled with emotion. 100 years ago, she used Wang Lu as a goal to motivate herself to move forward. Now, Wang Lu seemed to have stopped moving forward, but she felt that the distance between them was getting farther and farther away. Looking at the passage that led to the one-line sky opened by immortal Feng Yin, Qianghua had a smile on her face, but her heart was slightly cold. Behind this passageway, was it a colorful new world, or a pitch-black deathly stillness? Unfortunately, no matter what the answer was, for the current 9 regions, there was no other choice. History was probably the most flexible thing in the world. Even if it was a long river of hundreds of thousands or millions of years, even if it was the most glorious time when heroes came forth in large numbers, it could be compressed into a few pieces of thin yellow paper, which could be commented on by later generations. The New World expedition of 9 regions was such a history. If the story was written in detail, it would be too numerous to be written down. However, when it was compressed, it could be summarized in a few pages. In the spring of the year 6500 of the 9 regions calendar, the expedition entered the 20th year. Generally speaking, everything went smoothly, if not compared with the original plan. The difficulty and danger in the Wall of Worlds is well deserved. I really doubt how Senior Immortal Xiaoyao could persist to this point with his broken body. We found the last road sign left by Senior Immortal Xiaoyao, as well as the bodies of him and his wife. They probably experienced considerable torture before they died. Their bodies were broken, but when they embraced each other and fell asleep, they could still vaguely see a smile. Unfortunately, we, the later generations, can't smile. According to the original plan, we should have reached this point within 10 years, but now it has taken twice as long. I don't want to criticize anyone, because everyone's efforts are visible, but sometimes people have to wonder if it's wrong for the predecessors to pin all their hopes on us. If the heroes who turned the tide in the Great Era were still there, perhaps the expedition would not be so difficult. Today, I once again worship the patron saint of 9 regions. I seemed to hear his voice, but my companions all laughed at me for having an illusion. In the winter of the 653rd year of the 9 regions calendar, the winter of 9 regions turned out to be so cold. I accompanied Supreme Qianghua on a tour of 9 regions and saw that the earth was covered with snow everywhere. Although this silver-wrapped scene was gorgeous, it chilled people's heart. Such a harsh winter had never happened in the past thousands of years. Especially after the feng shui of 9 regions was sorted out, there should not be such an extreme climate. The immortal cultivators could not be affected by the cold and heat, so they were not deeply affected by this harsh winter. However, the mortal world suffered heavy losses. Senior Sister Qianghua allocated part of the manpower for disaster relief, but unfortunately, it was a drop in the bucket. Right now, opening up the passage was the most important thing, and there was no way to demand more from her. However, the cruel scene in the mortal world was really like hell, giving people nightmares. Senior Sister said that my immortal heart cultivation was not enough, so I think it's probably true. In the summer of 6510th year of the 9 regions calendar, there was a great drought. After the severe winter 7 years ago and the flood 5 years ago, we actually ushered in another great drought. The food output of 9 regions plummeted by 70%, and hunger was everywhere in the mortal world. Even the immortal cultivation sects were inevitably affected, and some low-level cultivators even began to starve. Senior Sister Qianghua said that this was because the lifespan of 9 regions was coming to an end and could no longer provide enough nutrients. If we can't reach the new world as soon as possible and get new life, such a disaster would only increase day by day. In the spring of 6515th year of the 9 regions calendar, the eastern border region's Panjin sect was destroyed by the heavenly tribulation thunder, and no one survived. The laws of 9 regions became more and more chaotic, and even the heavenly tribulation became willful. The lifespan of 9 regions was obviously coming to an end, but instead, it began to squander its remaining strength, which was really a waste. The people around me all said so, but few people cared about the casualties of the Panjin sect. In the autumn of 6520th year of the 9 regions calendar, senior sister Jianghu gave a report on the 50-year expedition. She really knows how to talk. In this form, she could also inspire people and make people fight. In the past 50 years, we have made brilliant achievements, and a beautiful future is in front of us. If it weren't for the fact that I also participated in the drafting of her speech, perhaps I would have believed it. Everyone said that it was a wise move for senior sister Jianghua to conceal the result of Zhang Zai's calculation 50 years ago. According to the original plan, 9 regions must break through the wall of worlds within 40 years, otherwise, there would be unpredictable consequences. In the past 10 years, senior brother Zhang Zai has no longer carried out any calculation. Perhaps he did, but senior sister Jianghua didn't let him say it. In the winter of 6525th year of the 9 regions calendar, senior sister Jianghua said that we all have to prepare for hibernation. The last strong wall of the wall of worlds has finally been broken. However, there is still a smooth but long road to the new world. This road is beyond anyone's expectation, and there is no such thing in the original plan. It will take at least 50 years for the 9 regions to cross over, but according to the current rate of decline, in 10 years at most, the 9 regions will fall apart and become pieces of lifeless gravel and soil. And those of us who have lost our ships will be lost in the wall of worlds forever. Entering hibernation is the best choice. We will sleep along the inertia for 50 years until we resuscitation in the new world. Senior sister Jianghua said that she would personally serve as the night watchman. Many people came to persuade her, but of course, they could not persuade her. It is said that after the death of Uncle Hichu, there was only one person in 9 regions who could persuade senior sister. So I prayed in front of his statue for a long time. I seemed to hear him say that he would help me, but when I resuscitation, I found myself buried in snow. It was my senior brothers who dug me out. Perhaps those words are just illusions. In the winter of 6526 year of the 9 regions calendar, I am the last group of cultivators to enter hibernation. Along with me are the fellow Taoists of Lingjian School. This is the first time I have met the people of Lingjian School at a close distance, and I feel like I have entered the country of women. Lu Li, Zhu Shiyao, Bai Shixian, Quan Zouhua, Yu Xinyao. Nowadays, the leaders of the Heavenly Sword Hall are almost all women. I chatted with my junior sisters before going to bed, and everyone guessed that this must be the bad taste of the former lead disciple of Lingjian School. However, seeing the smile on the faces of the people of Lingjian School, we can't help but have more confidence in the future. After all, if the guardian god of 9 regions is still here, he would at least bless the safety of his fellow disciples, right? Well, this diary should end here. I don't know when I will open it again, and I don't even know who it will be. I just hope. The handwriting stopped abruptly. Many years later. Closing the thin book, the young man was so excited that he couldn't help but make dozens of somersaults on the spot and uttered an unknown strange cry. While exploring the mountains with his companions, he accidentally got lost. In the fog, he inexplicably came to a cave and inexplicably met an old man in a cloak who hid his facial features. Actually, he couldn't tell the age of the other party. He only felt that the other party's breath was long, so he must be a senior expert. After a few casual words, he got a thin book, but unexpectedly, there was a priceless treasure in the book. After a long time, he calmed down, somewhat ashamedly scratched his head, and then said to the senior expert in front of him, "Thank you for lending me this book. It's of great significance to the historical textual research. It's enough to fill many gaps in the current research. I told you, the miraculous expedition must exist. This world definitely didn't appear out of thin air, but now everyone doesn't believe it. It's ridiculous to say that the Big Bang theory is just ridiculous. Even if the Big Bang can blow up this beautiful world, what about the immortal ruins everywhere? Could it be that the thunder body technique came out of thin air from the Big Bang?" After complaining, the young man somewhat reluctantly looked at the book in his hand. "Senior, I don't know, sure, I'll give this book to you. If you're interested in history, I have some other things here that might be able to help you." With that, the senior took out a few yellowed books from his cloak. The young man's eyes instantly widened. Although these books had a long history, no one knew how many years they had been through, but the immortal spirit aura left in them was incredibly pure, which was absolutely not something that anyone could forge. These are," the senior said, "they're just nonsense left by a few old guys. The story is too distant, so it may not be useful to you, but it's good to read as a novel." The young man took the book, flipped through it twice, and couldn't come back to his senses. After an unknown amount of time, the young man was stimulated by the bloating feeling in his lower abdomen, as if he had just woken up from a dream. I'm sorry, senior, I accidentally became fascinated. But, where did you find these books?" "It's in this cave, just a few more miles down." The young man was instantly shocked and hurriedly ran inside, but it was pitch black in front of him, so deep that he couldn't see the bottom, which made him feel a chill in his heart. The young man tried to take 2 steps forward, but was pushed back by an invisible force. The senior smiled slightly. Although his facial features were hidden in the cloak, the young man knew that he was smiling. "That's why I said that you and I are fated. I haven't seen a stranger for many years. I haven't had the chance to say goodbye to many of my old friends all these years. Now that I'm full of energy, I see that my wife left a book by my pillow, saying that she had gathered enough public food while I was sleeping, and that she was going to take the girls out to continue looking for fun. I was about to go out and find trouble with her, but the first person I saw was you. Logically speaking, outsiders can't enter this place, but no one can say for sure if it's a coincidence." The young man swallowed his saliva, and vaguely felt that he was about to experience the greatest adventure of his life. The senior stood up and waved his hand. Immediately, the pitch-black darkness in the cave dispersed, revealing light. A strong immortal aura slowly leaked out, causing the young man to be shocked. Even though he was a historian and not an expert in cultivation, he knew that there were probably countless divine weapons hidden in the cave. "I'll leave the things here to you, my wife has taken all the valuable things anyway. Sigh, after sleeping for so long, the first thing I do after waking up is to collect debts from others. These days are really hard. Young man, let's meet again if fate allows it." The young man couldn't hear clearly what the senior was saying. He stood at the entrance of the cave and looked inside, dazed by the sparkling treasures. The immortal civilization on this continent had just been born, and many things were far from mature. Although the senior said that the treasures in the cave were only leftovers, they were already far beyond his imagination. With these, he was practically ascending to immortality in one step. Old senior, what exactly is this place?" The man was about to get up and leave, but when he heard this question, he stopped and replied, "I don't know where this place is now, but before, there was a spirit sword mountain here." You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.